So good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you're joining me here today for this webinar on simplifying Microsoft Teams hybrid telephony. My name is Mark Vale. I'm the Chief Product Officer here at CallRoute. So I'm going to talk to you about the enterprise challenges that are faced when moving from traditional premises-based telephony to the cloud, and then I'm going to show you how CallRoute can help you simplify that migration and that coexistence. So moving to the cloud is easy. So they say. And while technology has vastly improved and simplified the enablement of cloud voice services, today we have lots of turnkey solutions from Microsoft, from Google, from Zoom, who all offer their out-of-the-box calling plan services. That's a real, just turn up at a very basic level, swipe your credit card and start consuming voice services. At a very basic level, that's very straightforward. But where cloud telephony gets complicated, unfortunately, is when it has customers. Real world customers with real world problems that need solving. And enterprise telephony right across the market is a mixture of different systems from different providers performing different functions within that enterprise. And for instance, you could have call manager for back office, you could have contact center for your customer services, contact point, you can have a mixture of analog phones in warehouses, in corridors and what have you, door access systems, tannoys, lift phones, all need to be considered when integrating your Microsoft Teams or your UCaaS platform into your voice network. And that's where the complexity gets complicated. How do you integrate those systems with Teams to make sure that your company dial plan remains intact and people can communicate? And choosing the right telephony solution for Teams is therefore a critical decision to make. So the enterprise telephony options when you're moving to Teams, what are they? So what you choose largely kind of depends on your goal and your objective. In Teams, you can get up and running, like I said, in a simple dial tone with calling plans and operator connect in a very short space of time. However, these are largely dependent on country availability and also the functionality that you require. With calling plans, you can choose to port the numbers across from your existing telecoms provider to Microsoft for those numbers and those users and services that can function with 100% Teams native functionality. The problem arises when you have some services that cannot be serviced by Microsoft Teams native functionality, and there might always be a use case for different systems that you have in your network. So, and when you start to move users across to Teams, how do those users communicate with those PBX users, with those contact center users or analog users? And I'm sure you could turn around and say to me, Mark, well, they've got Teams, right? They can just use Teams to Teams calls. And that is true. Probably in a large portion of scenarios, that is a true statement to make. But sometimes in large organizations, users don't have access to Teams devices or a Teams endpoint to make that internal call. So they might have old wireless phones for warehouses. They might be working in an environment where there's analog, and the budget to replace those devices for Teams native device might not be available. And that could be a distinction between your Teams project starting and not, because there isn't budget there to transform the entire business or your entire telephony. So how do we keep those users on net so that they can communicate with Microsoft Teams users? With Microsoft calling plans and Operator Connect, this is largely DDI-based, PSTN-based. So in this scenario, if a user was still in your contact center, you had a contact center agent who's taking a customer service call, they needed to transfer that caller to a back office Teams user. The only way to do that right now using calling plans and Operator Connect would be to transfer that caller over the PSTN, which might have some compliance issues if you're call recording and what have you. It's also going to introduce additional costs that you didn't once have because we're using the PSTN network to forward that call or transfer that call into Microsoft or into that operator. So when we start to look at the other connectivity options that can help solve this, there's also carrier provided direct routing or direct routing as a service. So if you have an existing carrier, there's a high chance that they have a direct routing solution for Microsoft Teams. Depending on what their services offer, you can simplify it a little bit in order that you don't have to port numbers across to Microsoft or to a different operator. You don't have to go and sign new contracts and run side-by-side services and then worry how those connect together. But you might still have a problem where Teams users can't communicate with PBX users or contact center users because of the direct routing as a service provider doesn't support extension dialing, and you have to then go and buy DDIs for everybody. So the next solution that we have is your own direct routing. So this is where you will go out and you'll buy a session border controller from a certified vendor, whether that's hardware or virtual, and connect that somewhere between your existing PSTN connections, your PBX, so that you can then route calls destined for Microsoft Teams over the direct routing trunk from that certified SBC. The problem with that is those SBCs cost money, tens of thousands of pounds, depending on the specification that you need. And if your long-term goal is to go native cloud eventually or consume cloud services, then the ROI on those SBCs might not be the best for you, and then they're not the best spend of money. There's also an issue around whether you have the skills in-house to configure those SBCs and manage and maintain them going forward as well, which you have to take into consideration. But the benefit is you have complete control over your telephony. So you can create that on-net experience. You can transfer users' calls between any PBX type system to Teams, vice versa, and you can do whatever number manipulation that you want in order to maintain your on-net calling experience. It's by far the most flexible connectivity method offered for Microsoft Teams, but it also comes with complexity. So once the technology is available to you and it's chosen, the problem that we have really extends to the way that telephony is being delivered in, well, since telephony was invented, I guess. But for enterprises, a traditional telephony project is a once in a 10-year project. And what happens in that project? It's all front-loaded with design, development, implementation, and documentation. At that point, that documentation, that design, that thought process, it gets filed somewhere and never to be looked at again. And people change in the business. Those key people who know why certain decisions were made leave the business and go onwards to their career. People who come in their place have a problem to manage that system. And at that point, it becomes largely, let's just maintain what we have and not change anything, because we don't really know why that call pickup group was created. We don't really know why that IVR was created, why these extensions exist. Do we still use them? It's often just easier to leave them alone. And that causes a problem when we look at transforming a business into using cloud services, because we always look at the history of the business to decide a direction for the future. So when we start looking at PBX configuration, we can see all these hunt groups, pickup groups, shared line appearances, all that good stuff. And then we automatically think that we need all that to be replicated in Teams. That can be a complete turn-off, because everything in Teams that needs a phone number needs a license. So then there's a licensing budget issue. But the truth is, the majority of that assessment and those configurations might not be needed, but it takes a long time for you to understand whether they are needed or not. You need to re-engage with the business. You need to find out whether people actually still use it in order to determine whether that service gets replicated and migrated or whether it gets cut. But these are all blockers that stop people from wanting to move to Teams, because these are questions that need to be answered ahead of the time, ahead of the technology. And those problems around budget are just some. You've got compliance. If you do compliance call recording for different elements of your telephony, how do you solve that? How do you maintain your number management? What porting do you need to do to different carriers? That's a task in itself. Understanding that landscape and understanding how the enterprise interacts with all these services and these problems is key to moving forward, but it's also a blocker. So what can we do to remove those blockers, really? By far the biggest blocker that we ever come across, and you could probably vouch for this, is existing contracts. So I've got an existing contract with PBX maintenance firm, or I've got existing contract with a carrier. I don't want to have to move, buy another service and run it side by side, even for a relatively short period of time, because it's costing me more money than what I'm paying today. But how do we leverage those existing contracts and remove and lower those barriers? We can look at different software. We can look at the way that we integrate, and we can look at transforming where we can. Largely overlooked by most projects is operations as well. So once you've done your project and you've migrated your users across, how do you integrate what you've built into your existing service? How do you support it? Do we need to introduce scripts for provisioning? How do we understand what we're using, consuming? How do we understand if we're paying the right amount of money for what we signed up for? Sure, there are several products out there that each individually solve each pieces of those puzzles. But then you start to put those together and everybody hates portals. So if you have a portal for analytics and a portal for provisioning and a portal for diet routing, a portal for Teams Admin Center, trying to support that becomes a nightmare for an enterprise at scale. So how do we solve that? Wouldn't it be nice if there was a cloud solution that could connect everything together? Wouldn't it be nice if you could just not worry about those existing contracts or buying those certified SBCs or buying additional services in order to get your Teams project off the ground? What if you could just bolt things together, old and new, and just use them? Well, now you can with call route. So what do? We essentially sit in between PBXs, your UCaaS platforms, your contact centers, your carriers, and we connect them all together, hence the name call route. So we have our own cloud PSTN service. So if, at the very basic level, if you wanted to get up and running with a phone number, we can provide that. If you want to integrate with your existing on-premises infrastructure without investing any more into what you already have, you can use our bring your own SBC connection. And what you can do there is you can use your existing PSTN lines, connect it to your existing voice gateways. Doesn't matter if they're certified for Teams or not. That's the biggest thing. You don't have to go and buy certified Teams SBCs. You just use those, connect those to call route, and use our certified SBC connection on the Teams gateway side to make that certified connection with Teams. You've got an Avaya, Cisco, Mitel, whatever flavor PBX, a bunch of ATAs, it doesn't matter. You can connect those up to call route as well. And we can provide that inter-routing on-net experience between those systems, between those offices, between the sites, between countries. So you don't have to go back and refactor and reconfigure every single PBX or voice gateway that you have in your enterprise to talk to each other and to be able to route calls on net between teams and themselves. And if in the future you decide that you want to bring on other UCaaS platforms, WebEx calling, Google SIP link, like Zoom, for instance, then you will be able to. And if you want to bring your contact center into that as well, you can do. Any contact center, doesn't matter whether it's Teams certified, Connect contact center, or a standalone contact center. If it requires a SIP connection, we can connect to it. We route the calls from your carriers to the contact center, and we can then connect those agents to any of your back office staff working on any of those platforms that you connect together. I mentioned bring your own SBC. We also got bring your own carrier as well. So if you want to start to converge your carrier connections away from on-premises into the cloud, you can terminate those connections in call route directly in the cloud with no infrastructure. So how does it work? So this is a very simple scenario. This is the lowest entry level that you'll ever find in the market. You want to use Teams, you're evaluating it, but you don't want to spend a lot of money, a lot of time in order to get that service up and running. You want to see how it interacts with your existing infrastructure. Using your existing SBC, like I mentioned before, you can use your existing carrier connection, your existing phone numbers, your existing contracts. All you need to do is configure a SIP trunk on your existing voice gateway to call route and create a connection from call route to Microsoft Teams, which is fully automated, by the way. So there's no technical requirement to deploy the diet routing configuration to your tenant. It's point, click, deploy. All we need is a username with the right privileges to deploy that. But that means you can then start to evaluate whether Teams is the right platform for some of your users without having to change much in your enterprise. And you can do this completely disruption free. And if you decided that Teams wasn't the platform, you could simply just remove it without any impact to your enterprise. If you decided that it was going to play an important part in your future, you can start to move users across without changing anything. Maybe once you've decided that Teams is going to play a part of the in your calling services, we want you to enable or empower you to choose when you want to migrate your users, whether that's in bulk, whether it's departmentalized, or whether it's individual. We want to give you that power. We don't want to we don't want to put obstacles in your way. So you can look at transforming your existing PSTN services to bring your own carrier, connect them to call route on the BYOC side, connect your existing contact centers and PBXs to call route downstream along with Teams. That gives you on-net global calling between those platforms. It also gives you the ability to change number ranges or individual numbers and point them at the services that need to answer those calls it needs to terminate to. So when it comes to moving users across, it really becomes a one-click task. With Microsoft Teams, we can also do all the PowerShell and all the assignment of policies, the phone number, etc., on the Teams user side, all under the bonnet without any interaction from any experts or what have you. So it becomes a really flexible platform for you to build and plan your migration. And even if this becomes your steady state, that's perfectly fine. Our goal for Call Route is not to give you a migration path only to Teams, it's to allow you to embrace Teams within the voice network that you already operate. So you've now completed your migration from your PBX, maybe you want to decommission it. And this is where the point where you don't have to go and replace tannoys or SIP devices, analog devices with SIP devices, or you don't have to go and replace your DEX solutions for Teams certified DEX solutions. You can reuse what you have, just connect them to Call Route. We'll route them to Teams and Teams to them. But maybe now you can look at transforming, when it makes sense, you want to transform your contact center, that's fine, just plug it in. You don't have to tie these together in one massive transformation project anymore. You can choose what you want to migrate, where you want to migrate, and when you want to migrate, all in your own terms. The kind of final solution, and this slide is kind of the pièce de résistance, so the point I'm trying to make is that we're a flexible product. So we flex with you, and it's like building your own Lego. So you have a PBX, you have DECT, you have multiple Teams tenants through mergers, acquisitions. Maybe you acquire another company who's already using Microsoft Teams for their calling services. It's great, connect their tenant, connect their carriers, integrate them into your network. You can start sharing services. It makes it a whole easier migration path. You don't have to port numbers. You can do that in the future when it makes sense. You don't have to tie it in with the migration. You can bring their carriers in and take them under your service. You can decide, if you decide in the future that you wanted to add WebEx or Zoom into that mix as well for calling services, you can do. If you have in-country PSTN requirements in high regulated environments such as India, that's fine. You can go and put an SBC on-prem, connect it to a local carrier and connect that to Call Route. It doesn't have to be Teams certified, it can be any SBC. And that opens the market wider to people who are more budget conscious. And then, but what about survivability? Teams released the Team Survivable appliance, And again, we can work with those SBCs in the same way as it's just bring your own SBC. In the near future, probably by Valentine's Day, I would imagine, be able to manage those third-party SBCs and through full policy management in Teams through the Call Route portal, so that you have one place to go and manage your voice cloud. In terms of infrastructure locations, at the moment we're in Europe, North America and South America, and we have plans to expand further beyond that in the next 6 to 12 months, so that it becomes a truly global solution that has availability regions, so that we can connect locally to your services, your carriers, wherever you may be. So that's it for presentation. And now I'm going to just show you the product, really. So this is the call route portal. This is my test environment, so you just have to ignore the stats for a minute. It doesn't represent an accurate picture. But when you log in, it's a web-driven portal. There is no CLI or there's no login tools that you need to worry about. It's all web-driven, point, click. And we try to design the interface so that it's really simple. Some people think it's too simple, but we put a lot of effort under the bonnet to try and break those barriers down into something that is quite complex and make it as simple and easy as possible. So on the left, we have carriers and SBCs. So if we wanted to connect our own SBC, we simply fill out the label, what signaling protocol, what IP address of the SBC we're going to connect to, whether it's going to be TLS or UDP. And then you can add that SBC into call route. If you wanted to bring your own carrier, we have predefined templates that we've worked with carriers to perfect, so that all you have to do is click connect. So if your carrier supports SIP registration or your carrier requires a dedicated IP, then we can support both. So what we do is we take all the static profile information, template that, and then we only present you with the customer specific information to identify and authenticate you as a customer to your carrier. So for instance, with BT, they have SIP registration and a pilot number. So we're only asking you for the information that is pertinent to your trunk. And we can go right the way up to someone like 6 Degrees, where it's just IP based, and we don't ask you for anything other than to label it. So we label it, add it in, we go and build a trunk with 6 Degrees, and when that's built, that will turn active. While that's building, we talk a bit about services. So this is where you connect your downstream services, whether it be WebEx, whether it be SIP trunks, whether it be Teams. So if we click connect on a service, we have different connection profiles to different PBXs, generic contact centers, but obviously we're here for Teams. So if we want to deploy Microsoft Teams direct routing, for instance, this is how we do it. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to have a user account in your tenant. You authenticate with that account. And then we then go and check the tenant to make sure that it's appropriately valid so that we can deploy direct routing in. And then we simply click connect again. And then we'll go and integrate our calling app, or our direct routing rather, into your tenant through all the voice routing policies, dial plan, etc. And then we'll synchronize your users into our platform. While that's going on, hopefully 6 Degrees is now turned active. So now we've built the carrier trunk and Teams is busy building in the background. Just going to wait for Teams to complete. It can usually take 2 to 3 minutes or so for this to complete. We're largely depending on Microsoft being working operationally well. So I can see the Teams is now built. And if we go into Teams, we can see now actually it's just the last step is synchronizing the users. So we've deployed the direct routing, and now we're just getting the users back from Azure AD. Hopefully this will show the users in a second. And then we'll go and wire it all in. There we go. So here's my users. At the moment, I don't have any phone numbers assigned to me or any of my test users in here. The last piece that I need to do is obviously to route calls, we need to know about the numbers and where the numbers are coming from, what carrier, and where we should route them to. So here we can click on add range. We can paste your number in. So we take the first number in the range, and then you can, if it's contiguous, you can choose how many numbers are in the range. So let's just say it's 10, for instance, in this one. The first number is a real number, the others won't be. Then we choose what carrier we're expecting this number range to come from. Choose 6 Degrees. We can choose to tag with these numbers with a specific tag if we want to, for making search easier at this point. And we want to choose then the default route. And this is where we can say, right, well, the majority of users and services in this range is going to point to a particular service, whether that's Teams or PBX, whatever it might be. So let's set the default route to Teams. And then every single number in that range is going to now route to Teams. We can see we've got the numbers here, and we show the amount of unassigned and the amount of assigned numbers in each of the ranges, and the carrier and the default service in view there. When we go into here, we could apply different routing logic on a per number basis. So even though all these numbers are now pointing to Teams, if I wanted to point them somewhere else to, let's say, to a contact center, I can come up here and choose SIP trunk, and I want to send it to my Anywhere 365 contact center, just that one number. I can go and do that, and it's instantly done, well, as near as instant as it can be. If I want to assign this phone number to me on my Teams account, I can choose and find my account in Teams, and because I haven't got a phone number assigned, it's going to assign this as my DDI. That will assign the routing on our side, but also going to apply the line URI to the Teams user using Teams PowerShell integration as well. So we'll activate the user for enterprise voice, and as soon as Teams catches up with us, because sometimes we're too fast for Teams, they'll be able to make and receive calls. With regards to number tagging, it's quite a useful feature. You can add tags in, and you can tag them with sales or whatever it might be, and you can filter by tags as well. You can color code these as well in the admin side of it. You can choose different colors for different tags just to make it visually more easy to distinguish between the services. The other feature that we have, you see that we've got the primary route as well. We've got the secondary route. So in the event that Teams is not working, so like, was it the start of the week or midweek where we had a bit of an outage in Teams for a couple of hours due to a networking issue, we could set the secondary destination of a number to go to a different platform, and that could be a different phone within the network, or it could be a call forward to that person's mobile phone, for instance. So we'll detect whether Teams is up, and if it's down, we'll automatically try the second path as well, which is kind of useful. The other useful feature as well is that we can do many inbound to one on any platform. So in the situation where I have a sales team, but maybe layoffs is a good hot topic in the IT business at the moment. So let's say some of the team has been laid off, and the manager says, "Well, actually, we've had to let Sean go. Mark, can you take over his accounts? Can you take over his number?" That's easy to do in call route. So if 7955 was Sean, and I want calls to Sean's DDI to come to me, I can simply just choose this, and rather than tick this as my outbound sale, I just leave it alone, and then that will instantly forward on any calls to 955 to Mark's actual DDI in Teams, which will be the 953 number. We also have reporting as well, so any statistics, inbound, outbound calls, etc. We'll break it down by country, by number, by user, for instance. And we also offer as a bolt-on PSTN call recording as well, where we're capturing the calls as it passes through our system. It's not the same as a Microsoft Teams compliance recording because we don't capture the Teams calls or the Teams meetings. So it's just purely PSTN compliance recording. So this is my assigned number in Teams, and if I give that a ring now, it'll work. There you go. So inbound into Teams from me. It's all set up, 0 hands, all within a couple of minutes, and that was a start to finish live demonstration of how easy it can be to integrate your carrier and Teams together, and also how you can connect your existing PBX. So that's it for this webinar.